Hello, welcome to Cannes Film Festival under a very nice sunshine. We are very happy, the Sony team, to welcome you again this year on the Nespresso Beach in La Semaine de la Critique. We are going to have a very nice event today with both members of the jury of this Semaine de la Critique. Before, I would like to tell you why Sony were interested and why it's important for us to be here at Cannes. For us, it's important to bring the art of cinematography and the role of the DOP more visible into this great cinema event. And that's why this year again, we're happy to have several films in competitions, shot with Sony cameras. So to mention a few of them, Mon Roi by Maïwenn, Dipan from Jacques Audiard, La glace et le ciel from Luc Jacquet, Le tout nouveau testament from Jaco van Dormel, and Ni le ciel ni la terre from Clément Cogitor. Also this year we are handing over a special prize for the new talents that are here present in La Semaine de la Critique, which is called the Sony Cinealta Discovery Prize. And two key members of the jury here in La Semaine de la Critique will make us the pleasure to talk about the art of cinematography. And I'm introducing to you Peter Suschitzky, great DOP that worked with David Cronenberg, also George Lucas, and lately on the movie After Earth, and Boyd Van Ruy, who is a writer in Hollywood Reporter. So please enjoy the event and see you.
Hi, welcome to Cannes and welcome to the Sony Cinealta webcast. We're here with Peter Suschitzky. Welcome, Peter. So let's start at the very beginning. When did you first become interested in cinematography?
I think the first thing that happened was that I became conscious of photography rather than interested in it, because I was born into a home with a photographer as a father. So before I was really aware of cinematography or photography, he was poking a camera in my face, which involved also turning lights on because the film was not very sensitive in those days. So I have the smell of the lights warming up and the leather cases in my nostrils as a memory today. And as I grew up and got to say the age of 5, I would try and enter his dark room, which was forbidden territory to me. It was the forbidden room, the dark room, full of mysteries. So I would bang on the door, couldn't reach the handle. And sometimes he would relent and open the door and let me in for 5 minutes, hold me up so that I could see an image beginning to appear in the chemicals. And it seemed like magic to me that he was involved with. And after 5 minutes, he would call my mother and I would be taken from under his feet, and he was able to continue doing his work as a photographer. But he was also a practicing cinematographer at the same time, working on documentary films. So my first interest was in photography and trying to unravel the mysteries of the darkroom and the making of an image. So slowly I think I became obsessed with making images. And I would look at the books of photography, the few that we had, and these books were not so available in those days as they are now. And I would pester him for more darkroom time. And eventually a friend gave me a camera, a sort of the equivalent of a Model T Ford. It was called a box brownie.
Right.
And I started to take photographs very clumsily, but I can still look at those photographs today because the negatives still exist, and I can see that they're photographs of my parents towering above me, taken from a 5-year-old or 6-year-old child's point of view. And my father gave me some paper and chemicals that one could use in the daylight. I'm sure they've long since disappeared. That process has disappeared, but I was able to make contact prints in the garden and therefore not bother my father in the darkroom. But all of that to say that that's how I began to be interested in images. And then I noticed that he would come home, my father would come home from work with little strips of film from the laboratory showing how each scene looked with different printer lights, from very dark to very light. And I built myself an imaginary cinema out of little bricks with a space at one end, which I imagined was the screen, and I would put a piece of film there and a light behind it. And I dreamt myself into the cinema. And I think somehow I've still kept those dreams I had as a child of being in a cinema. And that's really how I became interested in film and photography.
Do you remember the first film you actually saw in a cinema?
Well, since I'm date of my birth time was before the time of television. We had no television, so I wasn't exposed to moving images. But I remember the first film that I saw was probably a Chaplin film called The Rink, in which it's full of people roller skating. Because I was able to see that because on my birthday, my father, as a special treat, asked one of his colleagues at the documentary film unit where he was working to bring a projector. I think it was a 9mm projector. Doesn't really matter, but anyway, on the wall of one of our rooms came to life Charlie Chaplin, whom I still love.
No, I can imagine as a child that must have had a big impact. I mean, the magic of it, of course.
Yes, but the first film I saw in the cinema was undoubtedly a Disney film. It was probably Dumbo or Pinocchio.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about when you started getting serious or like interested professionally in cinematography or in photography? I'm not sure if early on a split happened or whether you still, I mean, you're still a photographer now as well.
Yes, no, my photographic activity started seriously when I was a teenager, and I managed to get my first reasonably good camera, and I would take it out into the street, undoubtedly under the influence of various photographers, street photographers of the day, and I processed them all myself. I still do that today, although I do digital work as well as photochemical work. I became really seriously interested in photography, and cinematography didn't interest me specifically until a little later on. When I got to the point of leaving school, I said to my father that I wanted to study music, which was my main passion. But he very wisely said, I think you should keep that for your pleasure, and you should probably go to a film school. And that's when I started to seriously think about doing cinematography.
Yeah, I mean, your work as a DP, I mean, you started very early on. I think your first feature was in your early 20s already.
I was 22.
Yeah, your first feature credit. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened? Because that is quite unusual.
It was really unusual in those days because we were expected at that time to spend 10 years, between 5 and 10 years in each job. So one started, if one was lucky, as a second camera assistant, and you spent 5 or maybe 10 years in that job. And if you were lucky, you would be promoted to being a focus puller, a first assistant. And then you would become an operator, a camera operator, and maybe by the time you were 40, if you were very lucky, you might have a chance to photograph your first film. How it happened with me was that I was very fortunate. I was working as an assistant in documentary films, and one of the directors I'd worked with phoned up one day and said, "Would you like to accompany me to the United States as a camera assistant on a series of documentaries for German television?" And I jumped at the opportunity and spent 5 months in the United States as a camera assistant working for German TV. And I showed the producer, who was a well-known German journalist, some of my photographs, and he said that he was sufficiently impressed to say, "Would you like to be a cameraman for me in South America?" Because he had a a program which involved perhaps 6 different teams in different parts of the world, each one doing a 5-minute film per week on the same subject. And I jumped at that opportunity, not knowing how lucky I was. I was 21. I started out making a documentary in Guatemala, and from there went all over Latin America. I could have stayed on more than the year I stayed in Latin America. I was working with a journalist, so I was a one-man band. I did the sound, sometimes the booking of the hotels, the driving, the focus, the lights, everything. I could have stayed on more than the year I stayed, but I was impatient. I was always impatient to tackle the next stage, which would be to get experience in a film studio. So I decided to go home to London and try to get a job on a film, in a film studio, to understand what lighting was all about. But without confusing the audience, I ought to go back to film school, because I've jumped forward a little bit. I went to a film school in Paris when I was 18. I was the youngest student there.
Did you speak French already at the time, or no?
I had learnt some French in school. I didn't speak it well. I didn't have good conversational French, but I could read French. I did French up to university level in school, reading Racine and Molière, but I couldn't speak it very well. Had to take an exam to get into the school in French. And in the school there were a collection of interesting people. Our film history professor was Georges Sadoul, who wrote one of the key works of film history. But my cinematography teacher was an elderly man who'd started out as a newsreel cameraman in 1905.
Oh wow.
The first, working for Pathé as a newsreel cameraman. The first day he took me up to the roof of the school, and he had prepared a silent film camera, and the first thing he did was to sing the song that they used to sing to keep in time to do 18 frames a second. And I began to think, well, why is he teaching me this? He taught me also he showed me how to do a fade in the camera and how to do a dissolve in the camera. All these things seemed to be, to me at the age of 18, to be totally useless, because I would never use them. But in fact, they are the most precious memories I have of the school, because I feel I touched the hand of somebody who was present at the birth of cinema. And it gave me great respect for silent films, because all these effects were done in camera. They couldn't change their minds. They had to wind the film back, destroying the take, had to decide on the take that they would use to make a dissolve, and then carry the camera to the next scene, which might be quite a long way away. And the first take had to be the good take. So it gave me, in retrospect, great respect, more respect than I already had for silent films. I didn't learn much of practical value in the school, and I left after only a year. And this cameraman, this cinematographer teacher, said to me, "There's not much you're good at, but you push the dolly very well," he said to me. So then now I can jump back forwards to how I started in film, and I'll allow you to ask me some questions.
Well, let's talk a little bit. What is interesting, of course, is that photography and cinematography are obviously related, but at the same time, not all cinematographers now are also photographers or interested in photography. So can you maybe talk a little bit about how they help one another, or how they influence one another, or how they're different?
You can be a very good cinematographer without being a good photographer. To me, thinking now about the two crafts, photography is probably much more difficult than cinematography. It's different, but it's much more difficult to make a good photograph that resonates with the spectators, with the viewers, than it is to do cinematography. Because in cinematography we have a narrative working for us. We have actors, we have music, we have atmosphere and cutting, everything that makes a film work. So it's possible that one can photograph a really good film that works very well. One can photograph it in a mediocre way. Unfortunately, one can, and people will think that it's good cinematography because there's so much supporting it. But a photograph has to speak with no sound and no narrative. And there are not many good. That's why there are probably not many memorable photographs.
But would you say that your interest in photography has influenced the kind of cinematographer that you are?
I wouldn't be able to answer that because it's impossible for me to separate what's in my soul, really. Everything that if you practice cinematography, I think everything that you experience in the visual arts is going to have some kind of resonance, some kind of influence on what you do. I don't think that my photography particularly helped my cinematography. Cinematography is something else, and it has certain difficulties that are not present in photography, such as the very important fact that you have to make the viewer believe that all the shots within a sequence are happening at the same time. In other words, we have to match one shot to another, and that's a particular skill the photographer doesn't have to have.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about how you prepare for a shoot? I mean, somehow you become involved with a particular project. What is the first thing that you do? I
read a script. That's the first thing I do. And I'm afraid probably my answers to this very important question might disappoint the viewers or the audience, because I don't know how I prepare. I know a little bit about how I prepare. The most important thing to me to start with is that the script should speak to me, that I feel, so that I can feel that it might be a film that will involve me as a spectator. Usually I can guess whether the film has ambitions to be a good film or not. I can see straight away if it doesn't have ambitions to be a good film. Maybe it just has ambitions to be a commercial film or a violent film,
right,
or whatever. You can never be sure as to the outcome of a film, though.
Can you talk a little bit about, I assume, I mean, for each movie you try and find the right visual style.
Yes and no.
Okay, no. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, how...
Yes, I think so. I've always thought that style is not something you can put on like an overcoat. It's something that has to grow out of the subject that you're working on. And there are many elements that contribute to the style, because when we cinematographers are not photographing something abstract. We have actors in front of us, and we have locations or studio sets, and we have clothes and so on. So all these things go to make up the style of the film. I'm nothing without the production designer, without the costume designer, and without the actors. I can't produce anything without
there would be
these elements.
Film, obviously.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I don't approach a film, I normally don't approach a film saying to myself or to the director, let's do it with this lens, this filter, this camera. I try to avoid the word organic, but I have to use it here. It has to grow out of the subject and the script. If it's, is it a dark, spiritually dark, I don't mean literally dark film, is it something light? I don't think, all these things will influence me, but I don't think that I change my style radically. It's a slow journey through life, in which I have, I suppose, my own style without realizing it. And I rely on a director being clever with casting. So when the director looks for actors for a movie, he or she is going to usually cast actors based on what can be seen of the actor's work. Sometimes they will take newcomers, of course, and take the risk of taking somebody without a history, but certainly with a cinematographer with a history behind him or her, it would be foolish of the director to cast a cinematographer against type, to do something that he or she has never done before, a style that's never been done before. When I was young, starting out, I remember working with a director who said, I'd like my film to look like a Nouvelle Vague film. In other words, in those days, there was one particular cinematographer who was famous for working with most of the Nouvelle Vague directors, and that was Raoul Coutard. And he would put all his lights on the ceiling and bounce them off the ceiling so that the camera could look in any direction at all. Of course, it was my first colour movie, so I said, yes, of course, I can do that, despite the fact that we nearly burnt down a very fine city hall doing it. But the light produced by this sort of technique is very boring, and I would never do that. I wouldn't do it today, because I would say, find somebody else, please, because that doesn't interest me.
Do you use references when you're thinking about a new project? I mean, are you looking at paintings or photographs, or how does the creative part? I mean, your creative.
Sometimes I might meet a director or work with a director who wants to look at references and suggests references. Personally, I look at photographs and I look at paintings every week. Mm-hmm. Wherever I am in the world, I'll go to exhibitions or galleries. So I don't need to look at something specifically for a film. I have them all inside me, and I certainly don't want to imitate anybody else's work. And I think it's futile to try to make one's work look like a painting, because the painter has something that we don't have. The painter has the touch of the brush or the pencil on the paper, and because it takes a long time to make a drawing or a painting, you subconsciously, you the viewer, are conscious of the passage of time that it took to make that work. We don't have that. We have either a photochemical process that's mechanical, or a digital process that is also mechanical. And painting is not just light, it's also the touch of the brush. We don't have that, so we have to do something else. And just to try to imitate the light in a painting is, to me, that feels a superficial approach, and I wouldn't adopt that.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about the evolution that has taken place in filmmaking? Because a lot of things have changed, I think, over the last, well, even in the last 10 years, but I mean, yes. You've been working now for much longer at that. Can you talk a little bit about how cinematography especially has changed?
I will try to. Yes, today the world in all its aspects feels as though it's changing rapidly. When I was young, starting in film, the evolution of the technology and the material available to us, the cameras and the lights, was very slow. It didn't change. It was quite normal to use lights that dated from the pre-war period, because there was no need for people to invest in new types of lights, since they didn't exist. They really didn't exist. There were tungsten lights, which meant when you were shooting an interior on location, you had to use gelatine to convert blue gelatine to convert the tungsten to daylight, and you had to use the most powerful one available, and they were very hot and big and bulky, and it was very difficult to use them. The sound was, to start with, I remember when I first went into a film studio, they were still putting sound on film, so the equipment required to do that was enormous, and we had big booms on wheels in the studio. And the cameras were basically based on pre-war models as well. Right. Luckily, the first reflex cameras were coming in, but they were very awkward to use because they were not silent. So I was able to. I've witnessed the change in equipment in film equipment, not only digital equipment. So the great leap forward was the HMI light, because previous to that we had to use arc lights to obtain a daylight light, and they were very bulky also. You couldn't take them into a small room. Right. There would be no room left
or a car,
for anything else.
That must be one of your nightmares as a cinematographer.
Well, working in a car is very unpleasant, yes. It remains unpleasant.
Yeah, there's no space whatsoever.
No. But yes, we all know about the arrival of digital photography. I've been using it with great enthusiasm for the last 6 years. It's made the cinematographer's work more flexible and easier.
I mean, the film that you shot for Cronenberg, Maps to the Stars, that was here in Cannes last year, and also the Matteo Garrone Tale of Tales.
And also,
they were both shot in digital.
Yes, and also another Cronenberg film. I'm just trying to remember the title of it. Cosmopolis. That was my first digital movie.
That was your first movie?
Yes,
where you
digital movie.
Right.
And in the first half an hour of shooting that movie, I said to myself, I never want to go back to film. That's just my personal experience, and many of my esteemed colleagues whose work I love still love to work on film, but I happen to like working digitally.
Were you hesitant about making that change in
Yes.
the beginning?
Yes,
Because,
I
mean,
was.
you've been...
I didn't know how it would be until I did, and I think all my colleagues would say the same.
Yes.
That they were a little frightened by.
So what
by
was
the
it
change.
in that hour and a half that made you understand?
Well, you can see exactly what you're doing, which has one major disadvantage, if you like. It's robbed the cinematographer of some of his mysterious powers. Because prior to that, the cinematographer was the only person who knew what the result would look like. And even then, there were likely to be surprises the next day when one saw the rushes.
Well, I think that goes back to what you said about the dark room and, you know, there being a sort of touch of magic to
Yes.
it.
Yes.
But I guess if you're working on any type of commercial films, and I mean that can include art house movies as well, but you need some form of control, obviously, to make sure that you get what you want, or something similar to what you want.
It's a great tool, but in fact, in the end, it doesn't matter too much what you use. What matters is the imagination behind what you're doing, not the tools you're using. The tools can make the job easier.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think this is one of the things that makes the work of a cinematographer so interesting, is that you're a technician, but you're also a creative person, a creative artist. And the sense that I get from you is that for you, the creative part comes first. And
yeah, I'm not a technician. I don't understand all the technology behind digital photography. Mm-hmm. I know how to use it. I was also not I didn't think of myself as a technician in photochemical photography either. I was not able to take a camera apart, and it doesn't. I'm not willing to spend the time learning how to do that. I hope that there are always going to be very gifted people with me, assistants with me, just as creative as I am, but who are also interested enough in the technology to have mastered it. I know what to do with the technology, but I don't know how it works.
No, I mean, there means to an end in the end, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's always about the end result.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you work with different directors? Because I mean, I imagine each director has a different way of working with the cinematographer and a different approach to his entire crew, not just the cinematographer, but...
Well, the way a director directs can also deeply affect the cinematographer's work, and make it more satisfying or less satisfying, depending on how far apart you feel you are from the director in your approach to cinema, to filmmaking. And every time I work with a new director, it's a new relationship that has to be forged, sometimes successfully and sometimes less successfully. It's inevitable. It's like when I work with a director with whom I've worked before, it's an easier relationship because he knows my habits and I know his or her habits. So it's a new relationship that has to be forged, a personal one as well as a professional one.
So let's talk a little bit then about Cronenberg, who you've worked with since 1988, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Dead Ringer. How did you first end up on one of his films?
I think it was partly due to chance that he'd had a success with his previous film, a commercial success which he'd never known before. And the cinematographer with whom he'd been working decided to capitalize on that success and move to Hollywood. And it's possible that Cronenberg also had felt that he'd got to the end of the road with that cinematographer. I've never asked him that question, and I don't really need to ask it. So he needed to find somebody else, and he had a list of 5 or 6 cinematographers in whom he was interested in. And I was on that list. Luckily, I was on that list. And luckily we met and we related easily to each other.
So, I mean, you've been working together with him for 25 years now?
Yes.
What is it you think about your relationship that has set it apart from all your other relationships? Because, I mean, that is really, I mean, a body of work that the two of you have created.
Yes.
That is very impressive.
Yes. Well, the fact that I've made many films with him, that makes it different, because I've never made so many films with one director. So that makes it very special. Each project of his projects is very different from the previous one, and presents a new challenge artistically and intellectually. And I love that because he's always very stimulating to work with, because he's always changing his subject. So of course you will find a link between the subjects, but each one is very different from the other.
But is he someone that has very precise ideas already about cinematography, or since you've been working together and after long he trusts your first instinct? And
it's a mixture, really, a big mixture. To start with, he listened to me a lot about where I thought the camera should be, which is a big part of our work. I can touch on that later, but it's not just light, it's not just framing, but it's also a choice of the number of shots that you choose to make in each scene, and where you put the camera is terribly important in telling the story, for many reasons. So to start with, he would listen to me and sometimes take my suggestions and sometimes not, but he always left me alone to do my lighting, and that's remained the same. He's never said to me that he wants the lighting one way or another. He's always let me do what I felt I needed to do. So he's been very supportive in that way. Today he's more specific about the lenses, the choice of lenses, than he used to be.
But do you feel that maybe that's also partially because he's worked with you so much and you've suggested different things? And
yes.
Now he understands more than maybe he understood.
Yes, and he's evolved too as a director.
Of course.
Tremendously. When we started to work together on our first film, his shooting was the subject was not conventional, but the way he shot was conventional, in that he would do a wide shot, a medium close-up, and a close-up of every actor in the scene.
Get as much coverage as possible.
Yes. Today he's much more daring and only shoots maybe 2 shots in a scene, and we did 1 take per shot on this last film.
Oh wow.
Only 1 take. And we didn't cover the whole scene in every shot either. He would know exactly which part of the scene he wants in which particular shot, in the particular shot we're doing.
Yeah, I imagine.
So he's very courageous. Courageous.
I mean, I imagine that in his head, I mean, he already sees the first edit of what he's gonna.
That's a joy for a cinematographer, because working with directors who want to shoot dozens of angles can be a problem.
Yeah, I imagine it makes you feel like they don't know what they want.
It's not only that, but it can be from the cinematographer's point of view. It's much harder to work with that kind of director.
No, and you need to adjust all the lighting too.
Yes.
I imagine each time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
even time-wise, that becomes
yes.
a problem. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about some of the other films that you've worked on? I mean, of course, there are very famous titles like The Empire Strikes Back or The Rocky Horror Picture Show. But is there one non-Cronenberg project maybe that for you was particularly satisfying?
I think in retrospect, but only in retrospect, I think The Rocky Horror Picture Show is one of my favorite films. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I really appreciated how good it was at the time. It was very foreign to my culture.
Right.
But today I think it's one of the funniest and most intelligent films I've worked on. I don't think it contains my best work for a moment, but I'm proud of it because it's such a good film and it's loved by so many people.
What is a film where you would say that contains some of my best work?
I don't know.
I know it's very hard to say.
It's going to, I suppose it
but that you're proud of, let's put it that way.
It should always be the last one, probably.
Or the next one, maybe.
Yes.
That you're going to work on.
I'm always dissatisfied with my work, actually. I'm never happy with my work.
I mean, do you watch? I mean, obviously, I imagine you see like a first edit of films once they're put together, but does it happen to you that you watch something again 5 or 10 years later?
Yes.
To get a sense of...
Of course, I'll revisit a film.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
just for fun.
But with the distance of time, does it not become easier to sort of have a detached sense of
it does,
your own
and
work?
then I can see how awful my work is.
Oh dear. I mean,
I can wish that inevitably I wish that I'd done this shot, this scene differently.
Mm-hmm. What is for you the most important thing when you're on set to have? What is the most precious thing to have?
I think, I suppose it would be a feeling of communion with the scene that I'm doing, which doesn't always happen, or a feeling of oneness with the film, which doesn't always happen either.
So, I mean, for you, in that sense, I can understand now why they said earlier that you just have to start with a screenplay. I mean, you have to feel some sort of...
It has to speak to me.
And then you organically work.
I don't know what I do. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you're not a very process-oriented person, I'm guessing. You know what to do, but it's very instinctive.
I'm striving for something that's in my head, in my soul, in my body, and I don't know what it is until I get there.
Do you feel that now that you've had years and years of experience, it's easier to sort of trust your experience, or do you really feel that each time you start a new film, you're like a beginner again?
A mixture of those two things. In the past, I've always I've always felt that my biggest enemy was the formula, and the formulaic way of working, which probably comes from if you work too much. You get tired, or you get worked out of any inspiration that you may have. So I've tried to, in the past, to pretend to myself that I've never done it before, and walked onto a film set playing that game, but it's a nerve-wracking game at the same time. Today I don't play that game because I know I've done it, and I know I can do something with most scenes, but I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it well at the same time. I don't know if I can do it well.
Obviously, you're the only cinematographer on each film set. I mean, is there a lot of interaction with your other colleagues outside of?
No, I haven't managed to meet many of my colleagues.
Because I mean, obviously that is a very interesting thing, because actors meet other actors all the time and work with other actors. But for you, you're the only cinematographer that is on set, so that is very unusual in a way. For example, to share and exchange experiences for you.
I enjoy doing that, but I don't have, because I travel so much, I find myself in different parts of the world where I don't necessarily know any people or crews. I've ended up with hardly any cinematographer friends. I have one cinematographer friend in Paris. I've met a few of my colleagues in the United States, but I hardly ever meet them. And I've met almost none of my colleagues in Britain, where I live, but don't work.
Let's just say to the audience a reminder that you can ask questions on Twitter. The hashtag will be here at the bottom, and we're going to have some questions for you from the audience later. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the different countries that you've worked in. Do you feel that there's a very big change for you as a cinematographer in working on, for example, a French set or an American set?
There are changes in the way people work, in habits of working that are important. The big difference between Europe, and not mentioning any particular country because I don't need to, for a cinematographer, the big difference between Europe and North America is that in North America there's a proper grips team, and their job is to set the flags and make the shadows. And to say something banal and obvious, that you can't see light unless there are shadows, so shadows are very important. In Europe, the electricians have the job of setting the flags, so it becomes an afterthought, and they're not as good at it, and it doesn't go as quickly as when the grips do it in North America. So as a cinematographer, I prefer working the North American way. That doesn't mean that I think North American films are better or more interesting to work on. It's just the work method is different. For the rest, the work methods are very similar. The lunches are different in different countries, and that's very important. Some countries have good lunches and some countries have bad lunches. Don't ignore the importance of
that is
the
very
lunch.
important. I imagine, of course, especially because I mean, it's long days film shoots.
Yes. I was very shocked when I first worked in Italy many, many years ago, I thought before I went there, oh, we're going to have wonderful lunches. And I got to Rome, and lunchtime came, and they brought out a white cardboard box, small cardboard box, with a picnic, a banana, a cold roll, and not much else.
That was not the Italian lunch that you were expecting, obviously.
No, but that's how it is in Italy.
Oh dear. But let's talk a little bit about shooting on location then, because I imagine that can be an advantage. I mean, you get to see some amazing places that you would not normally go to, but I imagine that must also present a challenge sometimes, because everything can be a lot more controlled in the studio, obviously.
Yes, yes.
So how do you tackle that? I mean, at what point are you involved in the location, or maybe, I don't know?
It depends on the film. In some films I have the opportunity to be involved in the choice of locations if I'm involved in the film early enough. Other films, on some films the locations are more or less set just before I arrive for my preparation period. I like a film in which there's a good mixture of studio and location. And in Europe there are fewer and fewer films which use studios because it's cheaper to shoot on location in many instances.
And do you feel that influences the way you tackle a film, or not? Since, I mean, if everything's on location, I mean, in terms of equipment and everything, and of what you can do and you cannot do,
yes,
I imagine.
Inevitably, in some unspoken way, it affects the look of the film. I like location interior work as well because I like the surprises that locations give. But sometimes the surprises are not good surprises.
No, but have you ever found yourself on a location where you've wanted to refuse, or you've actually refused, saying, I cannot work with this, I don't know, I mean, this is not something that is doable?
Yes.
Also because, I mean, they can imagine, of course, one thing, but then you have to think about all your equipment and what is expected of you.
It's hardly ever arisen. But recently that did happen. I didn't refuse to shoot, but I said it's not going to be possible to shoot here.
And how do you negotiate that when you're...
Well, either the director listens to somebody with experience and accepts that maybe it's not going to be possible, or they may say, well, I want to try. And if the director says I want to try, then I will say fine. But I might know in my heart of hearts that it's no good however hard you try. In some locations, for some particular reasons that I have experience of and have seen, it might not be possible to shoot there, in which case I have to shut my mouth and not say any more and wait for them to realize that it's not possible to shoot there.
But what for you seems to be the most difficult thing working on location? Is it a space issue, or is it lighting, or?
Oh, it can be so many things. I can't identify only
There's
one
not one
thing. No.
Okay.
No.
We have a question from Suzanne
Yes.
on Twitter. She asks, what are Peter's favorite artistic or photographic references for a film he has worked on?
I find that almost impossible to answer.
Impossible to answer, okay.
Yes.
But maybe talk about the most recent one, the film that is here, which has some very fantastical imagery.
Yeah, I didn't use any references for it.
Oh, really? Wow. So
I just reacted to the material that was in front of me, and in other words, the location that was in front of me. I reacted very strongly to the locations, as I hope I always do. And otherwise, everything else comes out from my guts. I work from my guts, really. I don't work with references unless the director particularly wants to show me references, but then I might ignore them.
Okay, I have another question here. Not sure who's asking it, but they're curious about your experience as a jury member this year at the Semaine de la Critique in Cannes.
Well, I can't be specific about our experience, but I always find that working in a jury is stimulating because of because of the meeting of minds and personalities. It's fascinating. It can be even in a small festival where you might not be given the opportunity to judge good films. The experience of being on a jury is fascinating.
Do you feel like as a cinematographer you pay attention to certain things that other jurors who might have other backgrounds don't?
I hope not. I think I bring my general culture to the experience of being a juror. I don't go to the cinema to see beautiful photography. In fact, an important point I'd like to raise is that I don't think that doing beautiful shots or wanting to do beautiful shots is the way to working on a movie, because a beautiful shot in a bad movie is meaningless.
Even distracting, yeah.
Well, I feel that my work is dependent on the context of the film, and I can do meaningful rather than beautiful shots in a meaningful film. But in a film without any artistic ambition or without any success at getting there, my work, or the cinematographer's work, will have no meaning either.
Okay.
So the trick is to be lucky enough to find a good project to work on, and that's not an easy thing to do.
I mean, do you get offered a lot of projects, or?
Probably not so many as I would like.
I mean, I imagine that must be, I mean, you sort of assume to be working on the next Cronenberg, but I mean, of course, there are other directors and other
There
projects.
isn't one for the moment, unfortunately. And I don't know if I will be able to persuade him to make another one or not. I don't know. I hope so, but
We hope so. We certainly hope so.
Yes.
Our cinephiles hope so.
Yeah, I'm currently looking for projects.
I can imagine as well that, I mean, there has to be a certain sort of, it's nice to be constantly working
Yes,
as well.
it
So
is.
you sometimes
But
I imagine there are.
I'm not constantly working. This year I've been working. Last year I was working on my book, which I've just had published of still photography. That took a lot of energy and time and anxiety to put together.
But I guess that is also a nice thing to sort of stand back and look at your own
Yes.
work and try and regroup it in a meaningful way, right?
Yeah, it's been very satisfying to do. One of the first things I always say, if I'm lucky enough to meet film students is who want to become cinematographers, the first thing I say is, please develop many hobbies, because you won't be working all the time. So it's important to have other interests in life.
No, and I imagine in any case, I mean, any kind of visual stimulation can always be, I mean, maybe subconsciously feed into your
Yeah,
work.
but it doesn't matter whether it's cooking, gardening, or a visual interest.
No, but I mean, you said earlier, I mean, you'd go and see exhibitions and things like this anyway.
Yes.
And I'm sure on some sort of subconscious level, any kind of visual stimulation is something that you might
I
use
think
later.
if you want to be a cinematographer, it pays to pay attention to all the arts.
I have another question from Dan, who says, I'm interested in a relationship between the cinematographer and DIT, that's on set, which would be the digital image technician,
Yes,
for those
yes.
that don't know. Do you rely on DIT and pre-grade each shot or after?
Okay, well, in the few films that I photographed digitally, that's now 4 films, I think, I've always found the presence of a digital technician to be very important. Maps to the Stars we made without a digital technician because there wasn't the money for one, so they told me. That's a big, I'll take a few steps backwards in history. When I started out in films, actors took less money, a smaller percentage of the budget of a film. So there was more time to make the film. Today, the actors take such a large chunk of the budget that sometimes there's no money to make the film, or almost no money. And that was the case generally. We had not enough money to make that film, so they asked me if I would make the film without a digital technician, and I said, yes, I'll have a crack at it. So we just made some, well, I think they call them LUTs. I know very little about this, but we made some general lookup tables for the film and applied them to the scenes. I discovered that I hadn't made enough, and that it didn't always work like that. I'd much prefer to have a digital technician with me, and we set a look for each scene on the spot.
Are you someone in general that likes to have a shot list prepared before you start shooting, or how precise is your preparation in that sense?
I'm afraid I'm not very precise. Some directors have shot lists and others don't. When I worked with Cronenberg, sometimes he has a shot list and sometimes he doesn't. We both leave a lot of space in front of us for inspiration of the moment. It's my preferred way of working is to rehearse a scene with the actors and decide with the director how to shoot the scene, how many angles they're going to be. The assistant director always wants to have a shot list because he or she has to structure the day. So it's great. It's very important for somebody to have a vague idea of a vague or a precise idea of what we need to do in the day in order to spend the right amount of time on each scene.
And I imagine that now with digital, do you feel like since it's easier or cheaper to shoot more, is that an opportunity that you use, or do you feel like, as you said with Cronenberg, if people know what they want out of the scene, then that's enough?
It's enough, yes.
So that has not really altered your...
I think that because my first film was made on what we called short ends, pieces of waste film from another film, it was made with short ends from a Kubrick film. I learned how to be very, very, very economical, and I still don't like wasting film if I'm shooting on film, which I hope I won't do anymore. But I don't like, if it's digital, I don't want the camera to be switched on all the time.
I have another question from Eniko from Twitter. She says, "Hi Peter, if you could turn back the time, was there any movie you wish to work on but never could? So what was the project that got away?"
Oh, I just would have had a dream list of directors, many of them dead before I started work, that I would have loved to work with. I would have loved to have worked with, ideally with Lubitsch, or John Ford, or Kurosawa, or Bergman, etc.
Okay, so there's a very
I don't have a very practical list.
But is there maybe one project that you could have worked on, but then for timing or some other reason it didn't work out?
Yes, I've made many mistakes in my life of various kinds.
I mean, not necessarily even mistakes, but I mean, there's always timing
mistakes
issues.
Turning down a film that I should have taken and so on. But I try not. I do my best not to dwell on those regrets.
Right. If there are any other questions, please use the hashtag on Twitter that you'll see here at the bottom. I have another question about working with young directors, because obviously with someone like Cronenberg, you have a certain routine now since you've worked so often together. Is there a particular thing that you do when you work on a project with a director that is maybe not very experienced and that you have never worked with before?
Well, I want to know to discover their taste and which movies they like if they haven't made a movie before, to try to gauge how to contribute to the film, how to help them visualize the film, because our job is really to give the director something he or she may not have thought about, to try to find the visual soul of the film. So I want to know the taste of the director I'm working with.
So how does that conversation evolve? I mean, how do you get a sense of their visual?
I would ideally like a series of meetings with that person so that we can exchange ideas and he or she can find out what I'm made of as well as the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the human aspect of it, since you're going to be, stuck on a set for, I don't know, 40 or 50 days.
Yes, under great tension, probably. And maybe we won't be lucky enough to have 40 or 50 days.
Is there one particular project where you would have liked to have had more time?
Every project. Yeah.
There's never enough time.
No, there isn't.
Okay, I have one question from Pascal, who wants to know if you're writing your memoirs.
No, I'm not writing my memoirs. I've written quite a lot for my children, but that's just private, about growing up a long time ago. And I've written something about those experiences around photography in my book. So I've written about what it was like to grow up with photography around me and how I started to explore it for myself.
Do you feel like, since you've been working in the business for so long, that some of the people that you've worked with that were part of your department, that were your assistants, that you've passed on that kind of information and that they've now gone on to have their own careers? I mean,
I don't think. I don't feel self-important enough to think that I can do that. I think everybody has to make their own journey and discover what they like aesthetically and emotionally, and how to deal with film crews. That our job involves so many things, not just technique and taste, but also dealing with people. Perhaps those people I've worked with will say that I taught them something, but I don't expect that I did.
No, I mean, I imagine even just, I mean, if you're starting out in the business, it can be extremely useful just to see what.
Yes, I mean, maybe they'll learn that I have a certain tenacity and obstinacy in trying to achieve what I want to achieve. Because you have to really be tenacious. It's a very tough world to work in. It's a tough job.
Is there one piece of advice for young cinematographers?
Yes, develop lots of hobbies.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, well, that's it for this webcast. We're gonna wrap this up. There's gonna be a little teaser with some footage from films that were shot on the Sony Cinealta cameras right after this, and there will also be a survey that your viewers. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just one last thing.
Yes.
Make sure that you love film before plunging into it, because it is a very hard profession. It can be very rewarding, but you have to really love it.
You have to really love it.
Yes.
And then you might have a career where you work on so many great movies as you have done.
I don't know. Sorry, but I interrupted you. I'm very sorry.
No worries. I think that's actually a very important point. I mean, since cinema is a very tough business, I think, and there's always, as you said, you always want more time, and you probably always want more money to do what you want. So you have to really love it. I mean, it's long hours, and you don't know if you're going to have a next project and when it's going to be, and so you really have to love it. I think that is very, very good advice. So yeah, we're gonna wrap it up now. We'll have the show reel, and we'll have a very short survey for you guys. So if you want to fill that in, that will help us to see your feedback, and hopefully we'll be here again next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart.